Okay. So I've recently been posting a lot of photos of some of the astrophotography stuff I've been doing, and I've gotten a lot of comments and people saying like, "Wow, you must have really great equipment," or "You're really good at this. I wish I could do it." And so this video is going to kind of start off with some of the basic setups that you could use to actually get into astrophotography and take some of the pictures that I've taken without buying really expensive stuff. And I'm going to break this up into a bunch of different videos with like any beginner and then like advanced equipment. I'm also going to say sorry about wearing the headset. It's the best way to get the audio. So first thing is that people always say you must have a really expensive camera, and I actually don't. The camera that I use is a Canon T6i, and the only reason why I use the I is because it has the rotatable and flip screen, which will help in when taking some pictures up in the sky, so I don't have to get down on the ground, bend, and look up. The lenses that I use are mostly just the kit lenses that came with my camera. It's the standard Canon 18 to 35 millimeter. This is what I use for wide angle. I've got the Canon 75 to 300 millimeter, which is another telephoto lens that came in my camera. And then more of like a medium-sized lens, which is the Canon. They call it the Nifty 50. It's just a 50 millimeter lens. All these lenses have their goods and bads to them, and they're all useful for certain purposes. You can't use them on everything. And not all these lenses can be used in the same way. They all have their unique purposes. Like the telephoto is going to get you cropped in really tight, but also with a telephoto lens, it lets in less light, so you have to expose longer. And then the downside to that is you start getting star trails. And in other videos, I'll go over like all the different technical aspects of how to capture and shoot photos, and I'll also put links down below with different astrophotographers who have taught me things that are really amazing. That's all free stuff on YouTube. Okay, so the most basic piece of equipment that you're going to want to have is obviously a camera. Doesn't matter if you use Canon, Sony, Fuji, whatever. As long as it's a DSLR camera or any type of camera that will allow you to have full control over the camera, which means some type of like a manual mode where you can set the aperture, you set the ISO, and you set the shutter speed. You don't want the camera trying to play on any of those different settings in automatic mode, because in order to do that, you have to have light coming in, and we're going to be shooting into a dark sky. There's not enough light for the camera to make the calculations that it needs to set those accordingly. So you want to do it on your own. And then it also helps if you could have a system where you could have different lenses attached to it that you could take off and remove without having to like use a different camera. So the other thing you want to look for in a camera too is I prefer to have the flip screen on it. It just makes things easier if you're like trying to get down on the ground and you have to like angle this up. Instead of trying to get down and look at it, you can just pull your screen out, flip it, and look at it. When it comes down to the size of your camera, like the different megapixels, the size of the sensors, if you have like a little bit bigger sensor in there, that's going to be good because it's going to allow more light. But when you're talking about the stars, it's really not that big of a difference. So if you're on a budget, don't go out and buy a $2,000 camera body when a $400 one will do just fine. The next important piece of equipment that you're going to want to have is a tripod. And the sturdier the better. You definitely don't need to go out and spend $200 on a sturdy tripod. Any like real photo photography one will work. I prefer aluminum. It feels like it's a little bit more sturdy. The one that I started on was actually an old tripod for those big shoulder launched video cameras, and it was just a little bit more sturdier and the head moved a little bit easier. But when it comes down to the tripod, there's so many options out there that you could choose from. Some are cheap, some are expensive. You don't need to spend a ton of money on it, but just remember the more money you spend, the better quality you're going to get, which will have some benefits to it. And that goes with everything and pretty much in life. The more you spend on it, the better it's going to be, usually. And the last piece of equipment that you'll probably want to have is like a remote shutter, or in this case, I'm using what's called an intervalometer. And the intervalometer is kind of like a remote shutter, but it also will allow me to program different settings. So I could take a certain amount of pictures over a certain amount of time with a certain interval in between each photo, and it'll take so many. So if I wanted to, say, take 100 pictures at 1 second each with a 3-second pause in the middle, and I want to do, I think I said 100 photos of that, I could just hit the start button, walk away, and this will cycle it itself. For about $8, you could get just a regular remote shutter that just usually plugs into the side of the camera. And all a regular remote shutter will have is just the one button on it, and each time you push the button, it'll take a picture. And the reason you're going to want that is because of camera shake. If you try to like hold the camera and snap a picture when you're doing a long exposure in the dark like this, any little vibration you make on this camera is going to show in your picture, and it's going to make your stars look fuzzy. And I'll get, again, more into the technical aspect into other videos. So this is basically just a basic setup that you're going to need. You don't need to have anything fancy. If you have a DSLR camera that has a manual mode in it and a lens, you can certainly get started. And if you don't have a shutter, remote shutter cable, to avoid the camera shake, all you have to do is just usually set the self timer so it's like a 2 or 10 seconds. 2 usually works just fine. That you can push the button, let go, it'll wait 2 seconds and take the picture, and that'll stop some of that camera shake. So most of my images up until July were taken with this setup right here. So you could see you could get some really amazing photos. But this has some limitations to it if you want to get more advanced into it. But just starting out, learning how to point the camera at the night sky, trying to see what's out there, you could take great pictures of the Andromeda Galaxy with this. You could take great pictures of the Orion Nebula. You could really take great pictures of this with just about anything as long as you know how to find it in the sky. That's one of the harder things. And again, we'll get into that in other videos. So in my next video, I'll get into my more advanced setup that I use now, which includes the star tracker, sturdier tripod, and some other attachments to my camera. And I'll go over those with you and what they do.